Hey everyone, this is kind of like a platform test, but welcome to the very first Harlequins review behind this screen. I wanted to try something a little bit different and different for me, but not different for what we see across the interwebs. And I kind of want to give a little bit of lag time for each episode, and then I want to go back and recap what we experienced from my side of the table as a DM, what we saw for the episode. So, if you haven't watched either of the episodes, they are on video on demand and on Twitch, and they're also posted on our YouTube channel. And they're usually previewed about 3 or 4 days after. But we'll get more into that later. But for the most part, thank you for those who are here in chat. I really appreciate it. I'm going to be dragging my screen over so I can actually see chat instead of myself. So that way, if you guys ask questions as we go, I can do my best to answer them. For those of you that have been watching the channel, which looks like all of you who are currently in chat, if you scroll down, you'll see some new elements that I've added because we've got some really cool things coming up starting this upcoming week with episode 3. There are ways to get you, the viewers, more involved with what we are doing because I believe that as Twitch is an awesome platform for just getting the idea of gaming out there, that you are missing something if you are not interacting with the audience, and you guys are the audience. I mean, we're here to play a game and have fun and drink a little bit. That's what this is all about. But we're here to have fun and we're here to play the game. But you're here to watch us, and it's kind of making sure that the audience is engaged and has some stake in the game. So I'll talk about that in just a little bit. We'll get there. However, let's dive on in to season 1, episode 1 for Harlequin's Requital. So I've tried to run this campaign. This is now my 3rd time attempting to run this campaign. And there was a lot of prep work for the last few months that has gone into me kind of getting a better handle on everything that is going to happen and everything that will happen, and to just be a little bit more prepared. And there was a lot of dissenting comments that I've read throughout different forums and different postings about how difficult for the DM Horde of the Dragon Queen can be. Now, it's important to remember that Horde of the Dragon Queen came out as the first release for 5e after the Lost Mines of Phandelver, which is the starter set. For those of you that are interested in getting into Dungeons & Dragons, I highly recommend spending the $20. Sometimes you can find it on sale for even 10. Picking up the Lost Mines of Phandelver. It comes with pre-generated characters, maps, books, rules, introductions, and things along those lines. It's enough to get you a little bit on your way. But I ran Lost Mines of Phandelver and I made it my own. I added a whole weird story arc, and that's all stuff you can find archived on the Harlequin's Requital YouTube page from years ago. It's all podcast style audio clips with almost no video because I had no idea what I was doing. This is the first game that was released after Lost Mines, and it is very much described as a burning sandbox. It's a sandbox because there's a lot of freedom that the characters get to take in the direction that they want to go as the story progresses. And what that means for the players is they have their own stake in the adventure. They get to go on and do things. However, what that means for the DM is even more preparing for absolutely everything. Now, season 1, episode 2 is a prime example of preparing for everything. But that's a recap for next week. But for this one, I did a lot of time. I read the book quite a few times. I did a lot of research online. I kind of plotted out my own storyline based on my understanding of it. Then I checked it by reading the story again. It's a lot of prep work for a DM. I don't think that a lot of players understand how much work goes into being a dungeon master on any given night. But that's kind of the burden that I get to carry. That's the yoke that I have as the narrator of their awesome story. I did a lot of research, a lot of prep, made some investments in some things, and yeah, keep the questions coming because I'll get to your answers as soon as I get to a moment. So after all that prep work, I was finally ready to go, and I felt like as we started this season, which we're begrudgingly calling season one, even though this is my fourth or fifth year as a dungeon master, but not for this group, that I was the most prepared that I ever could have been, and the tension was really high because we were finally doing this on Twitch. We had cameras and things along those lines, and that goes with the question for most fruitful Yoshi. I should be able to say your name, but how do you get comfortable being on camera? Also, about how prep in terms of time do you have to do, or how much time do I have to spend in prep? So when it comes to getting comfortable being on camera, I'm a bit of a performer. I've got a background with a little bit of theater, a lot of choir, a couple of bands, speeching. Wow, cool. It's definitely early. I've only had one Red Bull and one thing of coffee. So, but public speaking, I did Toastmasters for a while, and that helped me out a lot. And then what you do is you just forget that the camera's there. I know that the camera's there because, I have it in front of me on my screen. I have OBS up because I'm broadcasting from it. But yes, I can do the talkings. But it's one of those things that you wind up seeing it as another person instead of the camera itself. I'm here as the dungeon master, and I hope that the players are here as the adventurers to have fun and to tell a story. And the cameras are just like the lenses into that story. It's a very graphical way to think of it is that these are the eyes of the authors that are going to tell the tales when the adventurers die. And that's something that becomes an afterthought. It gets a lot easier with time. This is only my third or fourth time streaming, but when it comes to being in front of the camera or presenting, I've got a lot of time on my back that I've gotten used to this. So it does get easier. It's not always perfect. I often forget that the camera's there so much of the fact that I'll start looking over here and I'll be doing stuff on my screen and then I'll realize, oh crap, that's right, there's a camera on me. And so I've already seen that happen a few times in stream, and so for me it's just a mental check, and that's what I would recommend that the players do as well, is just kind of figure out where the camera is, and when there's an audience moment, where there's a Twitch moment or a broadcast moment, look at the camera, don't look at the DM, because they're the ones who are going to remember your story. Now, about prep in terms of time, do I have to do each week? So far, that varies. When I was running previous campaigns to this, I could spend anywhere from a couple of hours a week to closer to 20. There's a lot of prep based on the nature of the game in and of itself. Thankfully, we use a lot of tools here that are easier for me to get way ahead of the game and try to figure out what you guys are going to be doing to the best of my feeble-minded ability. However, at current, I'm spending on average probably about 3 to 5 hours a week in total prep for each game, and that's a little bit of AV stuff, so setting up new templates, making sure the stream is healthy, things along those lines, as well as making sure that things on Roll20 are okay, that I've reviewed the story a few more times, look at, how far have you guys gone in the first session and then in this session, and try to find a mean and figure out how far do I need to prepare, and then what I've learned thus far is to add about 30% more than what I think is possible, because the worst thing I'm going to do is over prepare, which means that my preparations go down for the week following. I will say that because of episodes 2 outcome, that I'm actually almost an entire session ahead based on how much I planned, because of how fast session 1 went, or episode 1 went. So let's talk more about episode 1. If you guys have questions, put them in chat. I'll get to them as I can. But as the party entered Greenest, I'm not sure if it was because we were streaming and because of the emotional investment as a DM that I had placed on the moment of going live, but I was almost physically ill with nerves, and that doesn't happen to me pretty much ever. It's happened a few times in my life, and this was definitely a weird one for me. It could also be the fact that I was dealing with a sinus infection, which really didn't help. And I had spent the last 5 days home from work trying not to die. But all that aside, it was a moment for me. And as the players crested the hill and saw Greenest, it was like this wave of just anticipation took over. And I just let it loose as a DM, and we dove into it. And at first, I was really worried about how long this first episode was going to be, because with people like Josh, whom I love him to death. He is quite possibly my best friend in the world, and I love how he will sit there and just try to say, "Hey, I know you're trying to get me to do this, but I don't want to, so I'm going to go do this," and it makes me happy that things like that happen. But I was so nervous about how the stream was going to go that I'm just like, "Oh, please, Josh, just okay. I'm going to make him roll. I'm going to make him roll and make him feel like he absolutely is compelled to go." And so that's what we wound up doing. But from that, what happened was, I think that the op tempo of the party drastically changed, because there was a lot of lack of leadership, which is expected to happen for the first probably 3 or 5 games. But when I see the comments, I see your question, I'll get to it, and I see the comments about timing out people who complain about Raymond. Hilarious. So the op tempo changed because you guys, all of a sudden, the party had direction. And for me, I had forgotten or not realized something the other 2 times I had tried to run this campaign. And this is going to be something I'm going to say until we're out of Chapter 1, until we're out of Greenest itself, is that I didn't realize that this entire chapter, this entire part of the adventure that's in Greenest, is all expected to take place in one incredibly long night. So that kind of changed my perspective as a DM. Previously, I had given them rest inside the keep and long rest here and lots of help and time to think, but I didn't realize that that's how this story was written. And I don't know why I had missed that over the last couple of, honestly, years since I've had the book and since I've tried running it. But understanding the fact that they, right now, as of the end of episode 2, they are just close to halfway done with Chapter 1, and how much condensed that time makes, it really adds weight to me as a DM, which I then have the joy of trying to impart upon the players in various different ways. But I did see immediately after it was the push to go into town that the party all of a sudden found focus, and they, much quicker than I expected, began to move through town. They dealt with the very first encounter, I think, really well, considering it was all of their introduction to Greenest. It was them trying to figure out how the characters were going to play and what things meant. Now, I do want to backtrack a little bit to say that based on a lot of advice from a lot of other DMs, I started my players at level 2. And I think that that's probably the best call. I look back, I watched the stream from the first episode, and there were quite a few times that I believe I would have had TPKs, which are total party kills, which is not something that a DM should want. I mean, again, I'm here to narrate the story of the adventurer's adventure. So I want them to survive. I want them to win, but I'm going to, see what the dice rolls tell them about whether or not they win. But there were a couple times that they probably would have been wiped. And I think that starting at level 2 is a good call. I could have nerfed it, but I think that removes from the other part of it that I just spoke about, which is, having the understanding that all of this takes place in like 7 hours is ridiculous. So the players are going to end up getting exhausted. They're going to end up getting tired, and they should be. How should a player deal with cyberbullies in chat? The player that plays Bella gets harassed a lot. Well, understandable. Yes, I've noticed that there is a little bit of bullying of Bella, but I think that may be related to the Wednesday stream, and I think that that's kind of interesting. But to the more serious topic of cyberbullies, I think that we find ourselves in a very interesting space. Dungeons and Dragons has always had kind of this unfortunate mark on it. that it's got a little bit of darkness and mysticality that surrounds it. And so for the whole satanic panic in the 80s involving this game, so there's a lot of bullying that the people who originally started playing this game in the 80s and late 70s were already dealing with. And so I one of the things I have noticed is pretty much across the board, bullying in general just isn't even remotely tolerated in most Dungeons and Dragons streams. Now, there's a difference between jibing and jest and poking your finger in somebody's ribs a little bit versus cyberbullying. I think that if there were any real intentional cyberbullying, I would have to deal with that as the host myself. So that's that for now. So Get Your Wife asked, how do you go about redirecting players and the players do something that will hinder their progress, or do you just let them do their thing? So I think that yeah, I see your point, Gidget Wish, but we'll talk about that in a second. But I think that's the quandary with being a dungeon master, is that I know the way the story should go and could go to the best interest for not just thematics, but for the players themselves. I know when there's things that they are walking right by that could be game changers for them, a treasure chest or looting a particular corpse or engaging with a particular NPC. But one of the things that I have to force myself to remember is that this is their story. I do my best not to railroad. Not that that's a bad thing. I think it definitely has its place, and that is the biggest tool that a DM can use to get players back on track, is to define the path that they need to take from where they are to get to where they need to be, and to not really limit anything outside of that path as a non-playable thing. But I also believe that a lot of Dungeons and Dragons is player exploration, not just in who the character is, but who they are as that character. And especially early on, I feel that it's better to let the players explore that through derailing the campaign a little bit and having those conversations that, in theory, probably wouldn't have happened while you're hiding, waiting for the kobolds to come around the corner before you attack. That it's kind of giving a little bit of more meat to the backstory. These are conversations that probably would have happened in different little encounters or things along the line that we didn't do any traveling encounters to get them to the town, that these things would have been able to suss themselves out. So when the players kind of derail a little bit, I usually let it run on a fairly long lead. For me, it's about the story, and I am perfectly aware of the fact that spending about 15 minutes on a topic of conversation that has nothing to really do with the campaign but has everything to do with character development will have a lot more runtime on it. I would rather spend that 15 minutes to see some amazing things happen with the characters down the line than to not have that 15 minutes and to force the characters to try to wrestle with that on their own. So really good question. And yeah, the chapter 3 of the DMG says that they should be able to handle about 6 to 8 medium or hard encounters in a day. And I agree. I think I think it's a little bit high. But one of the things that I've been alluding to is that this storyline quickly escalates. And to give you an idea, there's this thing called CR, creature rating, which is all based on the difficulty of the creature based on an average party in order to kill. There's no real level perspective. I can't say like a CR3 is really a 5th level character. There's no way to do that because it's all based on party size. And right now the party is a typical. It's a level 2 party because I have 4 characters that are all level 2, and so that's how that works. If I had 5 characters that were level 2, it'd actually be like a 2.2 and an 1/8 or 2 and a 16th or something like that. The math is there. I am not at work today, so I'm not doing math. So we'll just leave that there. But what you guys what the party has been running into is a bunch of quarter and half. So these are things that even in a fairly large number, and a large number would be like 6 or 7, you guys could handle with a little bit of difficulty. But it's going to escalate quickly because very soon you guys are going to be running into things that the lowest thing you're going to see is a CR1, a CR2, CR3s. So these are things that would be able to, on their own, in 2 turns, wipe out the entire party, and there will be multiple ones of them. So it's interesting to know that, and I agree that parties think it's actually 1 or 2 encounters in a day, but I do believe it's more. I think that the parties can handle more, and that's what Greenest is more along the lines of being about. It's about showing you that, hey, in a typical day, this is what your character could go through. And I think that when I read through the entire book, if I do the math right, and if you guys have some horrible rolls, you guys would see potentially, I think, about 7 encounters in Greenest. Now, granted, you guys turned what could have been one really small encounter into one 2-hour-long encounter, but that's a conversation for next week. So, what's your ideal party size? Would you like more people in this run, or is this a good size? So, I've played with everything from... let me give you a little bit of background before I give you the full answer. I heard about Dungeons & Dragons when I was in high school, but I never played. I actually got into Vampire the Masquerade, and which is published by White Wolf, which had its own issues within society as a greater whole in the 90s. But I actually was a pretty decent storyteller, which is the same thing as a dungeon master. They're all game masters for that game. And the most that I've ever run was 32 people at one time over a 6.5-hour long game, to where I was the only storyteller, and I had 32 people who were playing different characters all at the same time. We were all over at a buddy's house, and we just made an entire day of it, and it was an amazing storyline that I wrote, that I still try to find ways to bring that idea of that storyline into my one-off campaigns that I like to do every once in a while as a dungeon master. But I've also, as a DM, I've handled 6 and 4 and even 2. I think that 4 is the ideal size for most encounters, based on how fast people can play. One thing to keep in mind, and this is where the dungeon master has to wrestle a lot, is that 1 round of combat, regardless of how many people are in that round, is about 6 seconds of game time. So when you have a lot of people, that means that 1 round of combat, it's just going to get longer and longer, because if the average person takes about 2 or 3 minutes, and you have, I have my things that I have to run, which I try to consolidate as much as possible, purely for thematics. But then you also have the players who have to make very difficult decisions. You're talking about 15 minutes a turn. But when it comes to this particular campaign, I do actually want other people to consider coming to play. We do have the capabilities of adding a couple more people to this campaign as we get out of Greenest, and once the money's there, honestly. I need to get a couple things. But the really neat thing about how this particular campaign is working is that I'm also very, very happy to be able to play for the first time since I've started Dungeons and Dragons on a campaign in Wednesday, which is run by Gidget Wish on his channel. And we made the decision early on, before we went live with my campaign, that these campaigns are in the same universe. So I'm actually hoping to be able to pull people from the Wednesday campaign over to this campaign as we reach the areas where they may or may not have been. And if people want to invite others to play, all they gotta do is ask me first. But it's definitely not going to happen while they're in Greenest. It just wouldn't make sense thematically. But there are times where it will make perfect sense to have other people come in and step in. So I like the idea of having guest players. I like having the idea of having somebody else interact with the players that isn't me as the DM, me running yet another NPC, because what I think a lot of people get, but I still think, unless you've done it, it's kind of hard to fathom, is that in the entire world of Faerun at this point, because there are elements happening, these players at my table are responsible for one person each. Meanwhile, I'm responsible for millions, and anything that they interact with, that's me. And so there's a chance for the DM to breathe a little bit by having another player come in, but I'm all for it. Again, once we get out of greenest, there's a lot of chances for that, and I believe that the process is something that would be fairly easy. It's one of those things where we use D&D Beyond, which makes character creation incredibly easy. Not a sponsor, really wish they were, but it's one of those things that we get a character set up, we talk about it, we talk about your motivations, and I would give a little bit of direction, because even though you are your own character, you would be somewhat of an NPC. So I might give you a goal of something you're trying to get the players to do, or some kind of trigger that when the players achieve this is what you get to do. But yeah, I'd love to have more people at the table over time. But for general runs, I think anywhere between 4 and 6 is pretty comfortable for me. For Dungeons and Dragons, I think while broadcasting, we would never go more than 6, because then it turns into a bigger logistical issue. So there's that. So again, keep the questions coming. I really do like the questions. That's awesome. So the party gets into greenest. They work through the first encounter, and they move rapidly through a few random encounters, which I think they handled really well. And by that point in time, one of the things that I noticed, and those at the table who had it up noticed, is that you guys in chat were on fire. And it was about the second encounter that we ran into that I started to actually take a second and read what was going on in chat. And I have to say that as a DM, that's kind of what made my night, was seeing the engagement from the audience, to see the players' reaction to that, to see how that made them react in game, and then to see how that made you guys react, was something that I haven't experienced yet, because I've never broadcasted a game like this. So having the folks in Twitch on chat was amazing. And honestly, I think that, and I've made this comment a few times in different forms of social media, that this launch went better than I ever could have anticipated. Not just because the players made it much further than I thought that they would, because I've played with all of them, just on a different campaign, and I was very prepared for them to maybe get to the second or third encounter, but not to make it all the way to the keep, let alone make it all the way to the keep, deal with Escobar the Red, and make it through the sewers all in one night. And that was phenomenal. I think that honestly, you folks in chat had a lot to do with that, because as it made me relax and realize that things were actually going well because of how engaged you were, it made me DM better. And a better DM always makes the players have even more fun. And when the players are having fun, things happen a lot faster. It was mentioned by my wife that it seemed like the timing of the group was really on point, which she's absolutely right. It was. There's a lot of quick turnarounds, and I'm not just talking about the fun quips between the players, because I love that. I love that internal conflict that gets created just because we're having fun, and sometimes there's alcohol involved. But that's, again, neither here nor there. But I like how fast-paced the game went, and I think that at the end of it, the players felt necessarily excited, jubilant, and a little exhausted, because they realized they had played for 3.5, 4 hours straight with a very short break, and all that had happened. So it's one of those things that it's funny to see how external forces can drastically change things. But so the players made it through all the encounters, and I think they did a really good job. I think that, again, keeping in mind that this is their introduction to how am I going to play this character, which is always a big mental quandary, and their first time having to deal with this stuff, and the fact that we had cameras up and microphones, and I had computer screens in front of me, which I usually do because I am a bit of a digital dungeon master. But we had TVs, and we had all sorts of stuff going on that made it, I think, necessarily a little. They took pause every once in a while. I think that was an okay thing. But I do realize at the moment they got in the keep, that's kind of like where just straight role playing happened, and there was a lot of fun that happened in there. I got thrown some really awesome accents. I got to observe some really interesting situations, and I think that the players really kind of took that moment of revelation to just sit back and be their character, which I was happy to see and totally unprepared for. None of the stuff that happened inside the keep was even remotely planned. It was mostly from the book, but that was completely off the cuff, because again, I thought that at best they would maybe make it to the keep door. I actually had a conversation after the stream to where my thought was that the end of the stream was going to be as they make it through the doors to the keep, the doors slam behind them with a giant whoosh, and they hear the dragons roar behind them, and as they look ahead of them, they see a sea full of people, and that's where we'll end the stream. But instead, we got like another 45 minutes. And that was like, at best, I was hoping to get there. I kind of thought we were going to have to stop right after a round of combat. But I think the players as a whole did a really awesome job, not just thinking about how they were going to play, but playing the characters the way they deemed fit. And I expect there to be small micro changes as they adjust to their characters more and more. But I think that, it's one of those things that they've kind of committed to a character, so let's see what they do with it. It's going to be interesting. Making it through the keep was definitely very interesting. I was very happy to see a lot of the actions that were taken, even though they just kind of flustered my mind a little bit. Trying to steal Escobar's keys was hilarious. Having Steven off in the corner just kind of conducting. What is interesting about that is that was something that Steven pitched to me, I think just a couple days before we went live. You can correct me if you're still in chat, Steven. But I think it was just a few days before we went live. He came up with this idea for his character, and he created this thing on D&D Beyond, and I approved it, and it fits his character so well. It will become more apparent as time goes on. But the interaction with from Susanna and the guards was on point, and Jonathan was just I think he's playing a really good monk. I like it. I want to see where he goes with it. But then dealing with the little girl, having the juxtaposition of Susanna trying to quell the girl's fears and Josh just shooting straight like, hey, look, I don't even know my parents, so just get over it. Like, it was, to me, not just hilarious, but it was a really good moment. And then making it through the sewer. Now, the interesting thing about the sewer is the fact that of all the encounters that the players will have in Greenest, that is the one that everyone said not to nerf. And by that I mean to kind of like lower my dice rolls, or like, oh yeah, your AC is what, a 16? Oh, it's just a 15. Or hey, yeah, that's only 7 damage. Because the intent of the rats is to literally terrify the crap out of the players, to make them realize that there's a chance that they're going to die. And I think that the rats conveyed that. I think it was a couple of interesting encounters to where there was a little bit of frustration with restricted movement and trying to deal with the rats that were hitting them, but they couldn't hit. It was interesting, but I think the players handled that really well. And then they exited the sewer, and that's where we stopped. So all in all, I think episode 1 was phenomenal. I think that the players did a really good job of starting out, of trying to figure out who they were, and trying to play who they think their characters are going to be. And again, I think to piggyback on Josh's comment in chat, it is hard to try to get into the same headspace, and I think that over time, and it's not going to take a lot of time. It's just one of those things that takes a lot of game, that you'll be able to figure out the headspace for the character. I mean, for our Wednesday night campaign, there is literally, I've got a chart built of different levels of interaction that I have with one of the characters, that every time I interact with that character, I literally roll the dice and see what direction I'm wanting to go, because I have no idea what direction anything is going with Nightbreeze. There's a lot up in the air, based on a lot of backstory that hasn't even come out yet. So when it comes to getting into headspace, it's tough. It's really tough. But honestly, I think that all of the players are doing a really good job of trying to hone in on that. I would never expect you guys to, out of the gate, roll your first dice and be able to be your character. I think that any DM who expects that is not going to do that great of a job of being a DM. I think that a lot of exploration needs to happen for your characters, and the only thing that allows you to explore that is game, because we are not these people. We are playing these people. Like, I play Nightbreeze on Wednesdays, and Nightbreeze is, there's shadows of me within Nightbreeze, but I am not Nightbreeze at all. It's kind of interesting, but getting in that headcanon is really hard to do. But over time, it'll get better. Just like the cameras will get better. Just like remembering that we're on microphone will get better. And my transitions on Twitch will get better. And I'm just now realizing that there's things on that are supposed to be on my screen that are not on my screen, because that's just how we roll. And now I'm having to do live editing while streaming. It's fantastic. I love how things go. But there we go. Yeah. There we go. There. Awesome. But yeah. 100% Gus, a wealthy Adonis of a man. I also, much like Adonis, have the body of a Greek god. It just so happens that it's Bacchus. So that's my problem. But anyway, again, really happy with how season one episode 1 went. I believe that it sets a potential tempo for the rest of the game that episode 2 did not actually thwart, so that's a good thing. Unless you guys have any more questions, we've got about 10 minutes left. Might not even go the full time. Again, this is kind of like a platform test. I love the idea of giving the audience the opportunity to understand what the DM was thinking. It also gives me a chance to kind of clear the headspace, right? To kind of project, this is what I was thinking, this is what I experienced, this is what I saw. There'll be more deeper dives as we deal with some of the bigger stuff. But some of the things that we have that are going to be happening for next week, or I guess this week because it's Monday, will be that borrowing pretty heavily from some other streamers as well, most notably Castle Mac, who is another Richmond D&D group here. I am going to be encouraging audience participation by way of Dissonant Whispers, which is actually one of my more favored lower level spells, but it's just funny how it works. So if you guys are watching this on Twitch in a way that you can actually scroll down, you could see that there's a chat leaderboard, which I'm going to look into to trying to figure out why it's not actually giving me the real counts or finding a better way. However, for every follow and for every 500 chats in total, the audience is going to be able to give a dice of advantage to the table. Now they can use that dice to re-roll one of their rolls to give themselves advantage, to cancel out disadvantage, or to affect me with disadvantage, where they can say, actually, no, you're going to re-roll that at disadvantage, and they can hand me the dice. That's something you guys are going to see starting next week. I don't know if the chat component will be part of it, to where it won't. If I can't count the number of chats in real time, it really doesn't do me any good. But at least the follows will, and I can also make other ways that you guys can inspire the party, because I believe that much like I'm the narrator, you're the audience, and the audience's reaction has a lot to do with how the narrator is going to narrate and how the players are going to play. I've also done some format changes just to kind of make things a little bit better. I was getting a lot of feedback that the map is too big, that you guys actually are having a harder time seeing the players, and that the player cards were too small. I've rearranged some things, and you guys will see that on Friday. And I don't know when I'm actually going to wind up doing this on the regular. I want to look at all the other streams that are out there for Dungeons & Dragons, especially the ones that I follow, to where I don't enter I don't have a problem with going over what they are doing. I want to make sure that if they're broadcasting, that I'm not. But I kind of like the idea of just having like a Monday chit chat. So maybe like a Monday nights or something like that, especially now that football is basically over. Not that it's been a thing for me this year, but maybe that's something I can wind up doing. But if you guys like this, let me hear about it. I do appreciate you guys taking the time to stop by today and chat. And again, this is going to be an interesting adventure. I think that the most interesting thing about how Horde of the Dragon Queen works is that this is literally a world-changing adventure. There's a lot on the line for the adventurers to fix things. It's not just going to change their lives as an individual, as a player, as an adventurer. Yeah, I mean, their adventurer could die. That's a thing. But we are talking the fate of Faerun, the fate of the greater world, based on the outcomes of the things that are going to be coming down the line. So not like there's any pressure for these 4 adventurers that were thrown together on a trip to go to Greenest. So no pressure whatsoever. But anyway, again, thank you everybody who stopped by. I really do appreciate it. I look to try to do this again probably every week. Like I said, maybe it's going to be in the evenings because today is a one-off thanks to it being a holiday for me. But it's just one of those things that I wanted to try. Thank you so much for the awesome questions. And I will see some of you on Wednesday, and I will see the rest of you on Friday, hopefully. So with that, thank you so much.